We are honored to have a special guest this morning. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Liberman. I could spend the next 15 minutes telling you all about him, about his books, about his achievements, about his awards, about his accolades in his field. And he told me earlier just to forget about all that. Forget about all that. Just don't go there. So what I want to say about my understanding and my impression and my feeling about Dr. Liberman is what I want to share with you today as he walked in, gracious, kind, open, vulnerable, available, just willing to be a vessel for spirit, for truth, for light. He is a vessel, open, receptive. And he teaches about light and about consciousness and about seeing and focusing and just really sharing deep truth. I think that's what he's about, connecting with, living, and sharing deep spiritual truth. And so I want you to join me in welcoming Dr. Liberman as our guest this morning.
It's nice to be here. Last night, after speaking in Fort Collins, we went back to our room and decided to take a shower because we live in Maui where it's a little more moisture. So I, was trying to give my nose a break. And because I don't prepare anything in advance, I wait. And as I stood in the shower last night, what came to me was, what is God? And it visited me again this morning. And so when I came in, I said to Reverend David, if I could share about anything today, what would you want me to share about? And he pondered for a second. He said, something about unity, which is another word for God. And then, of course, all the beautiful children came up here. Is God a boy or a girl? God is both. God is the universe. God is the multiverse. It was like listening to a group of little Einsteins. But then, of course, I realized how it is that this came to me last night. Because we're all looking for that unity. We're all looking for that oneness, that thing that we ascribe to godliness. Seeing everything, knowing everything, being everywhere at the same time, which is essentially being infinite, which is essentially oneness. But of course, when we think of godliness or God, it's something abstract. It's up in heaven, something in the spiritual sense. But what of God is directly accessible to each of us? What if it isn't an abstract, conceptual thing? What if it's something that is residing within us every second of every day, and you've tasted it? You don't have to think about it. You're actually aware of it all the time. But maybe you haven't considered it, or perhaps someone hadn't quite shared it with you. Wise people that have preceded us have tried to give us a clue as to how to experience godliness. Reverend David mentioned this quote from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus was essentially saying, up and down and in and out, man and woman, it's all the same. But in order to say that, one has to actually see that. Not think about it, not an idea, not a concept, not a belief, because the opposite of belief is truth. The truth that sets you free. So when Jesus spoke about, when thine eye be single, what Jesus was speaking about was not seeing from the place that says, do I want chocolate or vanilla? But seeing from the place that has no point of view, that all is oneness. The great sage Sengsten, one of the Zen patriarchs 1,500 years ago, said, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, the world is clear and undisguised. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, hold no opinions for or against anything. Now you know that the mind can't do that. The mind lives in the world of duality, this or that, night and day. What is this place that sees without preferences? Now, most of us are thinking, well, what is that? But let's just go back to our birth. Because that place is literally our fingerprint. An infant emerges into the world and resides in oceanic bliss. Why did Sigmund Freud say that? Because an infant comes into this world hardwired for oneness. It has no preferences. There is no infant that is aware of religious preference, of skin coloration, of gender, of any preferences. An infant does not see its mother or father as something that is separate from itself. This is not theory. This is truth. So we come into this world hardwired for oneness. And then naturalness is confronted with normalness. Natural is just what emerges. A child never cries to upset you. Its expression is never contrived. Everything just occurs by itself. By itself. Do you realize that every function of your body is miraculously occurring without you? All of it. There is not a singular function of the body that is designed to do. We are not designed to initiate action. You know that thing we do every day? Oh, do this and do this. And we're not designed for that. That's a human concept that has nothing to do with our naturalness. Everything within our bodies is continually responding to something. What is it responding to? It's responding to guidance. What is guidance? It's the intelligence of the animating force of this universe creating the perfect curriculum for every single being, every single tree, every single everything, so that those that are meant to sing and play and bring a smile to people's face can fulfill their purpose for being. No thought required. You were born for that. Each of us has a reason for being. It is the design of our nature. Artists are not made, they're born that way. Sure, you could take lessons and improve things, but most of the time you have to let go of all the learning for the voice of godliness to come through us. We can't learn how to impersonate that, and yet it's there all the time. It's always, always there. Ralph Waldo Emerson gave one of the most beautiful descriptions of godliness that is accessible to each of us. He said there's a principle underlying all things. There's something that is fundamental to everything. Just like the Bible says, God created the heavens and the earth. God is all-knowing, everywhere, all-seeing. God is light. So Emerson is again saying this principle that we call godliness underlies everything. And then he goes on to say, it's a simple, nothing complicated. It's a simple, undescribed, undescribable presence residing silently within us. He didn't say it's that thing we hear all the time. He said it's something that resides silently within us. And then he goes on to say, we're not here to do, but to let do. Not to work, but to be worked upon. What was he saying? Life is designed to be effortless. None of us have to remind our hearts to pump. They do it day and night, precisely at the speed that's required for wherever we're at, and they do it without us. Your hormones are released whenever they're needed. Your blood sugar, your blood pressure, everything else is regulated with miraculous perfection. We don't even breathe on our own. Something is continually inspiring us. It not only fills us with the breath of life, but it inspires the next step of our journey. How does it do that? It catches our eye. You know that expression, it caught my eye. What caught my eye? In my work over almost 50 years in the area of light and vision and consciousness, I've come to discover that it isn't the eye looking for something, it's the light looking for the eye. Now, of course, you say, light, you mean like sunlight. Well, sunlight is a piece of that. But there's a reason the Bible refers to God as light and can't seem to describe God, and why every major physicist comes to the same realization. This thing called light, interestingly enough, and everyone thinks they know what light is, but light is totally invisible. It defines invisibility. And interestingly enough, it behaves as if it is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Wow, isn't that fascinating? This mystery within the Bible, that from which everything emerges, or as Emerson said, that principle which underlies all there is, physicists say that light, that energy, that can't be described, that's totally invisible, that acts as if it is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, is the nothingness from where everythingness comes. And then, of course, in the East, they have another name for the same thing. Because, of course, you can't put a name on this. And they call it consciousness. And the physicists say consciousness is behind everything. It's the final set of eyes. It's that which is fundamental to all that is. And they speak of the light of consciousness. And when physicists and scientists attempt to describe consciousness, they say this is the hard problem. Because just as the Bible does its best to describe something with words that can't be described, scientists are attempting to do the same thing. The only difference is that scientists are trying to find godliness through microscopes and telescopes and elaborate experiments and statistical analysis and published papers. And ordinary mystics like us, we depend on direct experience. Someone gets well that we don't expect them to get well. We call it a miracle. That's a direct experience. No proof necessary. You can't convince someone of that. That's the truth that sets one free. That isn't, I think, that's an absolute knowingness. But there's no knower. That knowingness comes anonymously. How do we taste that directly? We were led to believe that we see with our eyes. So we spend our whole life looking for truth with the physical eyes. I had a miracle that happened for me 43 and a half years ago. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I used to be a vision care individual, and like most people in the vision care field, and like many of you, I wore glasses, and I couldn't see without my glasses, couldn't drive without them. I'll make a long story short. I had what you might call a spiritual experience that happened in the midst of meditation. And even though my eyes were closed, everything was crystal clear. And when I opened my eyes, everything remained crystal clear. And it's remained that way now for 43 and a half years. And I'm not a youngster. I'll be 72 in November. To be able to see without optical aids, I can't explain it to you. But as I look back, I realized that I discovered what it is that's seeing, because I had a 300% change in my ability to see, but my eyes didn't change one bit. So when I went to the doctor 2 weeks ago, and both the optometrist and ophthalmologist checked my eyes, they found that my prescription was actually stronger than it was 43 and a half years ago. and couldn't understand how I could see the letters clearly, even though I still had this fairly strong prescription. There's only one way to explain that. What is seeing within us, the eyes of our humanity, are not the physical eyes. So then what's seeing? So you say, oh, the mind's eye. But the mind's eye sees as this or that. And so do the physical eyes. That's why the eye doctor says that very confusing question, is it better number 1 or number 2? Oh, can I see that again? And of course, when someone says to you, do you want this one or this one? Oh, let me think about that. See, all that requires work. You have to make a decision. You have to make a choice. And that's a word we hear very often today. But you see, when you see through the eyes of God, it's choiceless. There's no decision. There just is isness. The same isness we were all born with. Seeing with no preferences. So what is that within us? Because the Bible says God created humanity in God's image. Now that sounds just like some poetic stuff. But what if it's a fact? What if we are all seeing through the eyes of God, and God's not out there? In fact, there is no out there. How do we taste that godliness? How many of you found that sometime today you noticed that there was some thinking going on inside that thing you call your mind? Let me ask you a question. How did you know that was going on? How do each of us know when thinking, or more appropriately called worrying, is occurring? How does one know that? Well, let me ask a simpler question. When Reverend David came up before and was giving the announcements, you knew he was up here doing that. And you knew that you were in your seat. And you were observing him. And you never thought, oh, I'm Reverend David. You knew, because you were directly observing him. Whenever you are aware of anything, whether it is out there, a sensation in here, some physical sensation, or the activity in what you call mind, the only reason we are each aware of that is because our essence is witnessing it. There is no way this could happen otherwise. Something is aware of it and aware of everything all the time. Now, just as Emerson stated, my direct experience is exactly the same. This witness is silent, doesn't utter a word, doesn't make a sound, doesn't have a desire, has no point of view. It just notices. It is unconditional. It is infinite. Physicists refer to that as non-locality, something that goes beyond time, space, and any logic. It's not understandable because it's infinite. So next time you are aware that the mind is getting antsy, that you're trying to figure out how to create safety, security, predictability, 3 things that don't exist on the planet. Next time you notice that, just notice that you're noticing it. Just notice that you're noticing it, because awareness is curative. This is the truth that sets one free. When one discovers that godliness is not out there, godliness is everywhere, everything, and it is directly accessible in here. Not as an abstract, as an absolute. Every time you are aware of that mind chatting, you begin to realize that you are not the mind. You are not the chatter of conditioning that has gone on for millions of years that humans have existed. The mind is just something that keeps trying to create safety so that we're okay, so that we come out okay. And it worries, but we don't like the word worry. It has a negative connotation, so we call it thinking. It sounds much more intellectual. But if you examine it carefully, you'll see that all that orchestration going on inside, which is no different than someone orchestrating a presentation and having a lovely PowerPoint, it's also, we want to make it as good as it can be. But godliness is the maximum potential. There is no anything that is better than that. And that's already there. And when we begin to recognize that we are all seeing through the eyes of God, everything becomes clear. And it has nothing to do with us. We disappear. And all that remains are the eyes of God. Thank you.